Okay. So actually, Marie Schimmelpfennig needs very little introduction to hardly, I think, any of us. Marie has been involved in CLC since before it was CLC. She came into Sodality in high school, I think high school, not grade school, in Detroit, and has been involved in CLC since before the '67 assembly, when CLC took on its new name and adopted the general principles. Marie was the executive secretary of CLC-USA for years. She was on the World Executive Council for 2 terms as secretary, and she also has been at many of the world meetings that she's going to be talking about today. Marie is now part of the guidance team and part of the formation team, and was a key player in the very early formation work in the United States, developing the first formation program that we had in the country. Marie lives in Detroit. She's a guide, long-term CLC person, and when she's not doing CLC, she is working in immigration. She co-chairs the Globalization and Poverty Frontier with Patrick Cleary Burns. So Marie, it's yours.
Thank you.
Let me know when you're ready to turn to the GPs and the prayer.
Yes, let's do that first. I'm so happy to see everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. We're going to start with prayer first, and then we'll go from there. Just kind of put ourselves in the presence of God and presence of one another during this time. It's appropriate that we have this conference today on the feast of the Immaculate Conception. And we say, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women. Since the spirituality of our community is centered in Christ, we see the role of Mary in relation to Christ. She is the model of our own collaboration in Christ's mission. Mary's cooperation with God begins with her yes in the mystery of the Annunciation incarnation. Her effective service, as shown in her visit to Elizabeth, and her solidarity with the poor, as reflected in the Magnificat, make her an inspiration for our action for justice in the world today. Mary's cooperation with her son's mission continued all through life, inspires us to give ourselves totally to God in union with Mary, who by accepting the designs of God became our mother and the mother of all. Thus, we confirm our own mission of service to the world received in baptism and confirmation. We honor Mary, the Mother of God, in a special way, and we rely on her intercession in fulfilling our vocation. And that comes from our own general principles.
With all my heart, I raise my voice to proclaim your greatness, O God. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. In your love you have done great things for me. You have looked with favor on your lowly servant, and holy is your name. From this day on, all will call me blessed in every age to come. With all my heart, I My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. In your love you have done great things for me. You have filled the hungry with all that is good, and the rich you have sent away empty. You have remembered your promise of mercy and love, and have promised to keep it forever. With all my heart, I raise my voice to proclaim your greatness, O God. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. In your love you have done great things for me.
So this evening, we'll talk about the graced history of Christian Life Community through the World Assemblies. And so most of this material comes from our documents, but in some ways, in some places, I will, the ones I was at, them I might embellish a little bit because of my possible experience on them. And as we go, there might be others who have been involved in other ones that I was not there, that they will give their input. Next slide. Lois. So I wanted to start with just for us to all hear together, what is CLC? The Christian Life Community is International Association of Christians, men and women, adults and young people in all social conditions who want to follow Jesus Christ more closely and work with him for the building of the kingdom. And this comes from our CLC charism as well as our general principles. Next slide.
Sorry, they're having trouble getting him to move.
Oh, okay.
Oops. Let me try again. Whoops. Not sure why they're not moving manually. Let me try this.
Okay.
That works.
So we couldn't be talking about Christian Life Community without talking about St. Ignatius. CLC is rooted in the teachings and initiatives of St. Ignatius and his companions. As you all know, St. Ignatius, the one who founded the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits in 1540. And we find our origin in those groups of lay people that developed in different parts of the world at that time. The early part of CLC, which were called either the Sodality or the Marian congregations. In 1563, a Jesuit teacher gathers a group of students and Marian congregations is born. You can see it was approved by Gregory the 13th in 1584. In 1973, the Sodalities became a normal work of the church when the Jesuits were suppressed. And what happened for us in the movement at that time is the Jesuits were the only ones who knew Ignatian spirituality. So that really did not stay with us because they were the only ones who knew it at the time. So it wasn't until there were different conferences, assemblies that happened right after that. But rather than going through that now, we might pick that up at another time when we reflect on national, is to go directly to 1967 when we became Christian Life Community, which had a new name and a very new beginning. And we found out at that at that assembly, which happened in 1967 in Rome, that we have our three pillars. We talked about the spirituality, apostolic, service, and community. And Ignatian spirituality is the specific source of our spirituality. I just happened to be at that assembly for only 2 days. At that time, they did let observers come in, and I was at that 1966-67 assembly. And at the time that they were talking about the Ignatian spirituality, and our own Dr. Charles Wohl, who is in heaven now, was a member of Relano Moore CLC in Toledo, Ohio. And he was one of our delegates at that assembly. And to this day, I can still see Charlie standing up in front of this gigantic group of people, 3 different languages being spoken, and him just pleading with everybody with all his heart to say that in our new general principles, we have to say that Ignatian spirituality is the specific source of our spirituality, not a, but the. And he went on to talk about his formation in Fidelity, which at that time for him, that he did have a chance to experience the spiritual exercises. So with that, we do have in our general principles that it is the specific source. It's a very important, at least I wasn't there for the whole thing, but a very important part of that assembly. And we have to also talk about the general principles, as they were not Father Louis Paulison, who was our ecclesial assistant in Rome. And he stated in one of his documents that the GPs were not prefabricated or written behind a desk. They were of the fruit of living experience of all of its members. Next slide, Lois, please. In 1970, we had a World Assembly in Santo Domingo. I was not present at that. And the general principles at that assembly are amended and sent to the Holy See for approval. There was a crisis, as I understand, at that assembly, trying to figure out exactly what happened, but it was more of a conflict between the northern and southern hemispheres. The wealthy countries were, as the people in the poorer countries could not see or maybe understand or not realize that the wealthy countries maybe were looking at the poor, but not the way that the southern groups were. And so Jose Gzell, our at that time executive secretary at our own office, and one of the Jesuits there went to that part of the world to see what they could do to bring everybody aboard on our general principles as they were amended, as well as what the problem was. And I think they succeeded in bringing that to some help for us as a world movement. Next slide. 1973, our 6th World Assembly was held in Augsburg, Germany. And their theme was the call to be free, a community at the liberation of every person and of all people. And we began to we needed to look at the solidarity with the poor and oppressed, and a commitment to transforming structures that were not just. And that also is in our general principles. We began to look at the need for a deep rootedness in our spiritual exercises and living the exercises in everyday life. And there was also a deep understanding, or a need, I should say, for having a communal life that witnesses simplicity of life. Next slide. 1976 was in Manila, Philippines. I was there as a delegate along with many others, but anyway, our theme was Poor with Christ for a Better Service. The delegates were challenged and confronted with poverty in the Philippines and the spiritual wealth of the materially poor. I think there was a possibility that we would not have had it in the Philippines, because during this time there was martial law happening. And I just remember getting off of the plane in the Philippines with soldiers all around, just with guns. That was my first time I experienced that, and it was really quite an experience. But here we began to see mission as an integrative source for us. We had to move beyond just going out and doing. There was a great deliberation and grounding of our concrete situations in places where we ourselves lived. There was a great deal to look at with immersion experience and to see the wider world in a new way. We came to that assembly, first of all, with about 40 representatives from, from 40 different, from 20 countries perhaps. And we had a course that we did before the assembly. And what the course did was to bring us to the beginning of understanding our deliberation in our situations in our world, and also by having immersion experiences. That's the first time we'd ever try to experience that. So I think there is, Lois, look at the next slide. That should be there too. Oh, no, it's not. If you could go back to the one before. What happened is that the delegates again were challenged, and we began to see mission as very integrative. When we went out in different groups to go out into to be immersed in different situations, there was a group of people that were visiting the barrio in the area. It was in Manila, it was very poor. There was also a group of CLC people who met with Mrs. Aquino, who was the first woman president of the Philippines, and then attending the arraignment of Mr. Aquino. That was very impressive for a lot of for the people who were there. But at nighttime, we would come back to the center, and we would discuss what happened to us on that day. Not just a discussion, but what is it that what can we gather from this, and how can we go forward? It was quite an experience to have that course. From there, we moved on to Baguio City, where we had our assembly. And again, looking at Poor with Christ for a Better Service were many of our presentations, and also our follow-up to discussing and sharing with with each other from different countries what that meant for us. Prior to that assembly, when we went up to Baguio, we had a 10-day directed retreat, and all in silence during that whole time. This was then followed by the assembly. And after the assembly, we had another week of formation. And there were 2 formation courses that were put on, and we were looking at how is it that we can form our people. And from there, we had the program called Survey that came out. Later on, it was developed, I believe, into Kira's and documents, but that was the beginning of looking at and taking our formation very seriously. And I remember at that one, that there were 8 of us who said, well, can we do something more? And so they allowed us to go into another room, if I could say, and the 8 of us there were just 8 of us from the United States, from Germany, and from the Philippines. And we studied the structures more than anything else. And what we came to an understanding that we just don't go out and do things for the sake of doing them, being involved in any kind, what we might call mission. But then we gather back together to share with one another in our communities what happened to us, and then to look at what happened to the people that we might be working with, as well as what is it that, how can we take care of that structure that is really oppressive. It just takes a long time to do that, but it was really important for us to do. Next slide. That really should be 1979, was our 8th World Assembly, and that was in Rome. That one, our theme was toward one world community at the service of one world. Our common belonging to our partnership with each other is much deeper than what is expressed in the World Federation. That's what came out of that assembly. And should we work actively to become one world community? We had a commitment to use the Ignatian discernment to address that question. The World Exco at that time proposed to the delegates of Rome 79 that Ignatian communal discernment be used to determine this new structural level. I was at that one too, and I just still can remember, still envision this huge table where everybody was in this circle round and round. And we were posed with that question, do we want to become one world community? And we listed every single person there, we went through all of the pros and then around the circle to all of the cons. And it took a long time. It took 3 days to do this, but we were in that assembly for 10 days. And not only doing it around our circle, but then we had a chance then to go visit with each of the regions, the South Africa, each of the regions around the world, and talk about it in that assembly, and then even go back to our own delegates so that we can bring as much information and as much a discernment that we could to the table. Well, after the 3 days, 2/3 of the national communities said yes. But that was not enough for all of us. We decided that it would agree to pray with the question back home and return it to the next assembly. I remember the executive council at that time, along with the process team, said that was just very important to do if we were going to continue on as a world community at that time. And also to repeat that same discernment at the next assembly, which was held in Providence, Rhode Island. And there we had one world community at the service of one world. Our communal discernment was used once again to go around to see how was that idea of living out that one world community experienced in our global community, in our local communities. And at that time, there was a clear consensus and confirmation on the question. And we moved from a federation to a one world community. I think it's important here to say too that sometimes we use the plural in communities. And we always have to remind ourselves that we're not a group of communities, but we as CLC are a one world community, not communities, one world community. So that was the beginning of our looking at that as at that World Assembly. Our next one was in Loyola, Spain, and seeing Mary as our model of mission, and her telling us, do whatever he tells you. We felt confirmation in our identity rooted in the spiritual exercises, sent on mission with Christ, poor and humble, and with Mary in liberty, poverty, and solidarity. It was at this, oh no, I meant to say something in let me just go back 1 second. 1982, when we had that assembly in Providence, when I said earlier that when we came, we didn't come as just little groups of people from our CLCs, but we came from our countries. We came from our own experiences. And during that, from April until June of 1982, you might have remembered, there was a war that happened between Argentina and the United Kingdom on the control of the Falkland Islands. And I remember coming to that assembly, and maybe some of us knew that was happening, maybe we didn't. But the representative, the delegates from Argentina and from the United Kingdom met together to discuss this problem that they were experiencing and how was that affecting them. And I think they did have a facilitator with them, but again, I don't know the outcome of that, but the point was that we all come together with our own lived experience, again, as we said, in the global community. I just needed to bring that out to that one. Okay, I'm sorry. And again, I say the 10th one was at Loyola, Spain. And we were beginning to have a deeper identity for us in the spiritual exercises. I remember that Father Kovenbach was our ecclesial assistant, and he was at this assembly, and he said to us that the Christian life community wished to be a body for the Spirit, as Our Lady was, to set out on mission, to commit themselves in such a way that the gospel takes flesh and the Beatitudes become a reality for those who are poor, suffering, searching for justice and peace, or weeping. At this time, we did find our rootedness in our identity in the mission. And I believe that was truly a starting point of beginning to look at how we are an apostolic community. Next slide. Oh, okay, it's still 86. We recognize that we were not able to be faithful to our mission without situating it in the context of commuting, feeling that it is an entire community, which is sent united in mind and heart. There's also a big discussion for us in mission. You know, what does mission really mean? Do I just go out and do something? But that's not it. It's understanding what each one of us are involved in mission, and that we can share that together in our CLC group. And again, that's in our assembly document. Okay. Our 1990 assembly was held in Guadalajara, Mexico, an international community at the service of the kingdom to go out and bear fruit. And we looked at our revised general principles were approved. There were about about 8 people who met in Rome to really look at the general principles. And then that's when they were accepted. That was about a year before, 1990. And at that time, we experienced a grace of knowing ourselves as moved by a desire to serve with Christ in the work of the kingdom. And we have been confirmed in this call. At the same time, we have come to know ourselves as still in need of greater unity and spiritual freedom as a community of disciples. There was an invitation or reflection on being at the service of the Lord as a lay Ignatian and missionary body in the church, with a deep sense of a greater common involvement in mission. And again, our general principles reflecting the experiences and challenges of one community, again, since 1967, were presented and approved. And there was a great deal of solidarity that happened at that assembly. Next slide. Our theme in Hong Kong was CLC Community and Mission. I have come to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were blazing reality. As a global community, we must seek greater integration of social realities and its problems and challenges into our life and action. His spirit, which presides over history, moves and inspires us to be attentive to the signs of the times and to offer from our spiritual experience a constant and humble service for building justice and peace. We must live this out with words, not only with words, but with actions and in truth. And I believe some of that is also in our spiritual exercises. And the idea of looking at the signs of the times, where again are the structures that need to be changed, are very much in our general principles. Next slide. In 1998, should have said this before, but every 3 years we had, or every 2 years we had a World Assembly, and then later on it changed over to 3 years, and then later on into 5 years. But the theme at Tight C was CLC, a letter from Christ, written by the Spirit and sent to today's world, deepening our identity as apostolic community and clarifying our common mission. It's in 3 areas of mission: to bring the freeing power of Christ to our social reality, to find Christ in our varied cultures, and to let his grace illuminate all that needs transformation, to live Christ so as to bring him to every aspect of our daily life in the world. And there was, I believe I was not at this one, but the common mission of what is it that we're after? What is our social reality? Looking at social reality, looking at how we can live out the exercises, not only as we make them individually, but as we, how do we see the exercises flowing within our understanding and growth of our CLC communities? That was an important part of looking at as an apostolic community. Next. In 2003, our World Assembly was in Nairobi, Kenya. Our theme was Sent by Christ, Members of One Body. DSSC as a vehicle for apostolic mission. We had a webinar several times ago, or forgot exactly when, that Liam put together for us. At this assembly, they talked about what do we do with DSSC? What does that mean? It's discern, send, support, and evaluate, to change, to grow in our leadership capacity, and to look at our formation. It was a clear understanding of the role of ecclesiastical assistant and a support for our own national communities. But again, the highlight was our DSSC. How do we really do discernment in our communities to become more and deeper into an apostolic mission? Okay. Next, okay. Oh, this must be the same one, okay. This one we felt confirmed in our call to become an apostolic body that shares responsibility for mission in the church. We had identified strong formation and leadership at all levels of our world community as essential requirements in a move towards a more specific body. CLC's movement toward becoming an apostolic body calls for our developing structures to support the world community at all levels. I believe at this time, and even several assemblies before, that we did have time for some formation work that the delegates were able to be a part of, and formation that was definitely rooted in the spiritual exercises. Next. Journeying as an apostolic body, our response to this grace from God. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him what he had done and taught. Again, DSSC was looked at as a means to build up this apostolic body, and our way of life as a prophetic sign. We widened our networks and joined action. The grace given to us at the time was sharing our lives, and the discernment of our experiences and challenges results in a clear confirmation of a call to become a lay apostolic community. That is what we received in Nairobi and brought forward in Fatima. Okay. In Lebanon, we went from our roots to the frontiers, recognizing Christ incarnate amongst us and continuing to commit ourselves to the common good. Here we celebrated our 450th anniversary of CLC as a lay Ignatian community, and explored and confirmed our frontiers of globalization and poverty, family, ecology, and youth. And our last assembly that we had so far was in Buenos Aires in 2017. CVX CLC, a gift for the church and for the world. How many loaves have you? And a grace is received, we desire greater depth and integration in the living out of our CLC charism in the world today. The 4 frontiers were confirmed at this assembly and to work on for the next 5 years. I would like to ask if, prior to time, um, if people from the assembly, let's say the past four assemblies, if they have something to say to,
Back to them.
yeah. Those who were delegates would be really good if they could.
Yeah, I don't know who's on the call. Dorothy, are you on the call? And I don't know who's muted.
Yeah.
But Dorothy Zambito, Ramon Calzada, and myself were the delegates from the United States for that assembly. And I think the thing that, I think the slides said it well and Marie said it well. We were confirming what was uncovered as our need to I think at the Taisi Assembly, when we talked about a common mission, it sort of freaked some of us out because we were in communities that were doing individual missions. And so we were trying to figure out, well, what does it mean to be, does it mean we need to stop doing what we're doing and suddenly begin to do something in common? And so that's when the understanding of DSSE, that we may actually be doing some individual activities, but there's a way in which the community owns that. So Nairobi was just kind of helping the whole assembly understand better and explore better what that might mean. And as we explored it, we realized that if we were going to do that, we needed leadership with different capacities. We needed to reorient our formation. So we thought about how are we a discerning community together? And we needed a different kind of relationship, more of a partner relationship with our EAs.
Oh yeah, that was an important part there too.
Anybody else want to add to that? So who was there?
And Dorothy must not be on.
Okay.
And Fatima?
Let's move all the way to Fatima. Liam was there.
Ed was there.
Who?
Ed Bloha.
No, Ed was not there.
only
Ed was
Fatima.
the next one.
I'm
No,
sorry.
Ed was not there.
I was there representing Nigeria.
Right, and you
Damtogo.
were in Nairobi too.
No, I was not there.
That's right, there was a sister in Nairobi.
Fatima.
Yes.
Well, Dom, do you want to say something about what happened in Fatima from your perspective?
Two things that struck me, well, actually three things. One, I was trying just to find out how things were being done. I felt out of it when I was beginning to be there. Two things that struck me. One was people really wanted Daniel Frank to remain as president, but there was a legal difficulty, and it was CLC Kenya that was able to find the wording to enable that to take place.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
And I think she was elected unanimously.
Mhm.
And the second was Father Adolfo Nicholas said yes to be our World Ecclesial Assistant. And his talk was that we're no longer looking at individual prophets in the world, but prophetic communities. And he asked CLCs to be prophetic communities.
That's really good. Thank you for that.
Liam, you want to add
Liam,
anything?
Liam, did you have anything from Fatima?
The only thing that struck me was the idea of one apostolic body. I believe that a lot of communities had a hard time grasping the concept. So the movement from federation to one apostolic body at the time was still a challenge, even though the theme or the idea was introduced 5 years before in Nairobi. And I think the concept is still in play now. Like for example, us, we're still trying to get the idea of what that is, what that really means.
Mm-hmm. Good.
It's Ruth
Then-
from Canada. I was at Fatima. I was one of the delegates, and I really was struck by the. We had a. I think it was one morning or afternoon where it was like an open market session where there was a open. That's it, and there was a process of gathering of energy, and how that became really part of discernment, like where the Spirit was leading us, and then coming home from Fatima with the priorities and sharing that with our national community. So that was my first experience of a being part of a world body. And then there was Stephen's Pocket. Those of you that were at Fatima might remember that. And we had I think we had delegates from Rwanda that arrived with and none of their luggage or anything. So it was truly a wonderful experience.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ruth. In Lebanon, Lois, you were there.
I was there.
Who else?
Anne-Marie Brennan was there. I'm trying to remember who else was there. Who was the third person from the U.S.? Jim Borbely was there. Father Jim Borbely was there. And I don't think Anne-Marie's on the call tonight.
No.
And
Rick was
Ruth,
there.
you weren't there from Canada, were you?
No, that was I think that was Leanne, maybe Mary Balfe.
Yes, Mary Buff, I think.
Yeah.
Now, Elaine Nightingale Reagan from Canada was our process guide for that assembly.
Right.
So yeah, and what I think what I love as I've listened to this presentation and worked on it with you is that we seem as CLC to have a world assembly where we focus outward, and then we have an assembly where we dig down deep back into the spirituality and the depth of who we are. And then we focus outward again, maybe an assembly or two later. This one having focused in Nairobi and in some measure in Fatima, we started to look outward. And then this one was really saying, well, if we are an apostolic community on mission, what are those priorities? And so this is where we took, I was on the EXCO at the time, we took 3 priorities to the assembly: globalization and poverty, family, and ecology. And we had speakers on all 3 of those. And the assembly said, we need to add youth. So the 4th frontier was added by the assembly at that assembly. The other thing that was important at that assembly, just in terms of dynamics in the world, the war in Syria had just started. That's right. And so most of our Syrian delegation were there as refugees. They were there coming in from Lebanon because they had been forced out of their country. So there was an evening when people just listened to the story of the folks from that country, from our community in that country. So
that's good. Thank you, Lois, for that.
And Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires. Okay, who?
I don't know if Carol and Henry are on, or Carol.
Carol.
Aunt Marie's not on.
Ed Bloha.
Ed,
is Ed on?
Is Ed on?
I don't think so.
But Carol is?
I don't know if Carol is.
Ed is on.
Ed
is on.
You say
Ed,
can you of that assembly?
Can he hear us?
Yes, I hope. Maybe not.
I've asked him to unmute, but not a response.
Well, until Ed jumps on, this
Oh,
is
Carol, please.
Yeah, this is Carol, and I did not go as a delegate, but I went as a representative of the North America region and participated in the regional gatherings during the assembly. You also need to correct the date. It was in 2018.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And as most people know, one of the things that came out of that assembly was the deepen, share, and go forth. And I really appreciated what Lois said about the movements as you kind of do this overview, which is why this graced history process is so valuable for us as a community, to just see those movements, and where there is new clarities at one assembly, how it takes several years to let that percolate and be held and prayed with for a deepening, to make it a lived reality. So I think where some were expressing around the world the existential climate crisis and wanting us to have movement in that frontier of integral ecology, rather than articulate specific, I don't know, goals or priorities around that within that frontier, there became this awareness that in order for this to be a worldwide movement, we had to deepen in our processes of communally discerning how we deepen that and enable to share the gifts of that way of proceeding with the world. And so that was a beautiful thing to just witness. And just one personal experience, and I'll be quiet. Hopefully there's someone else on the call that can speak to their experience. But besides just meeting people from all over the world who spoke different languages, and yet we shared the same language of Ignatian spirituality, and diving so quickly into one another's hearts. Besides that, there was one evening where we gathered to share what was the Spirit doing around these frontier areas of mission in various parts of the world, and just hearing the stories and hearing what we were doing as CLC in our various countries around mission was so life-giving. It was just a transformative experience, and one really just life-changing for me. I was so grateful to be there.
Carol, did you also have insertion experiences at this assembly?
Yes, there was the immersion experience of going to the barrio where Pope Francis had ministered and interacting with the people, and having opportunity to be both in people's homes as well as a shared mass outdoors, and seeing specific mission in that barrio.
And did you not go also to a park where it was the women who prayed for their lost ones? I forgot the name of it.
Henry and I did that personally, but that was not part of the.
Oh, okay. I thought it was.
Individually, okay. Yes. The mothers of the disappeared. Yes.
Yes.
Several of us did that. You know, at our own time, but it wasn't the whole assembly.
Okay, well, thank you for that, because I knew that, you know, several of those assemblies where we had immersion experiences were very, very important for the, you know, for us to experience. Those of us had the chance to do that.
Is Barb or Frank on the call? They were there as delegates, Barb or Frank?
Frank, Barb? No, Barb wasn't. Barb was there.
Addie.
Barb, Frank. Addie, is Addie on? No.
No, I don't think so.
Nor Ed Ploha, we can't get him.
And I don't know if Frank's on. So maybe that's okay.
Okay. Anyway, so we'll make a couple of those. Thank you for some of that correction also. Well, Lois, do you want to?
I'm sorry, this is Ed. I was on. I'm having some technical difficulties.
Ed, do you want to share a little bit about what happened in Buenos Aires for you in Argentina?
Yeah, it was very, very, very moving. And I'm just listening to the visit to the little village. And I was very, very moved. The last time I experienced that kind of physical poverty was when I visited Poland in 1963, and I visited a family, my family, who had a thatched roof and a dirt floor and so forth. But I just felt an awful lot of joy in the community in St. Michael's, and it was. There was no hostility. There was just a feeling that things are as they are. And I said, well, you know, I'll be asked about my impressions of the visit to the village, and what would you like for me to say? And he said, well, just tell everybody that we pray with them and they pray with us, and we love you. And I was just moved by the very positive feelings, and yeah, it was a very moving experience. And the kind of external manifestation of one's faith in processions and hugging and physicality and so forth, it was just really quite wonderful. And we sang songs, and we passed around some of the fried bread, which I really liked. And we made more and more tea, and it was just a very sacramental liturgical experience. We just went around, and we touched at a very deep level.
Great. Thank you for that, Ed.
Okay.
Lois, do you want
Yes.
to ask for questions or whatever?
So I'm going to move us into just a little bit of reflection. What my experience, I was on the World Executive Council for 10 years. And as a consequence, I was at only 3 of these assemblies, far fewer than Marie. But I was at 3. And what I came to realize is that the whole, that what we're really experiencing, at least what I believe we're experiencing World CLC, is a dialogue led by the Spirit between the communities, the national communities, and us together as a world community. So when we come together in assembly, we take time to say, well, what's been going on? And we kind of name the state of where we are, and then we take a step forward. And after we get really clear about what that step forward is, we elect a leadership team that have the responsibility to help the world community carry that out. And then that leadership team puts on the next assembly and turns it over to the assembly. The assembly says, okay, where are we? And based on the theme, they set the next step. So that dynamic is just how I see how God has moved with us over these years, of these 50 years, 50 some years since we started. So my question for you to reflect on for just a moment was, what particularly caught your attention as you listened to Marie for sure, but as you listened to the other people who were present at an assembly? And then reflect on that for a minute. And then the question, what is, World CLC has been blessed over and over again in our history. What grace or blessing stands out for you as you listen tonight? What do you hear that God is doing over these years in our community? And spend a few minutes on that, and then I'd invite you to put it in chat. Now, when I take down this screen, you won't have those questions, so let me leave them up for just a minute. And then when I take down the screen, you'll be able to get into chat. So take a moment or two and just reflect. Give you like 2 minutes, and then we'll start putting things into chat.